Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Using a Home Simulator for IFR Proficiency. My name is Russell Hartley, and I'll be your facilitator today as we cover home simulators and how to utilize them best for IFR conditions. Our first presenter is Chris McGonegle from Sporty's Pilot Shop. He'll cover what makes a simulator, leading hardware and software packages, and weather editing to make the most out of your IFR practice. The second half of this webinar will feature Josh Harnagel from Redbird Flight Simulators. Josh will cover FAA-approved training devices, areas of focus for IFR proficiency training with a CFI, and best practices for training in a simulator. A quick reminder that this webinar will be recorded and posted to our YouTube page, along with all of our previous webinars. So without further delay, Chris, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Russ. Appreciate that intro. And thank you to everyone who's attending today. We are going to talk about how you can use an at-home simulator in tandem with IFR proficiency or IFR training. There's a lot to be covered, so let's jump right on in. So a quick introduction. My name is Chris McGonegle. I am the Director of Search Marketing here at Sporty's Pilot Shop, but previously I was a product manager. So I was hands-on with a lot of flight sim hardware as well as a lot of our other products here at Sporty's Pilot Shop. So I like to think I know a bit about those. I am a commercial pilot with my instrument rating, and I earned those through Sporty's Academy. So I am very familiar with the training curriculum here at Sporty's, and that helps a lot in finding those connections between using a simulator and actual training or flying in real life. And then lastly, the first program that really got me going on flight simulation was Microsoft Flight Simulator 4.0. I can still picture a lot of those graphics and those Pantone colors that started off for me. And it is amazing to think where we've come since that program that came out in the late 80s, where we are today. But I'm excited to talk to everyone about how you can use a simulator and how that really feeds into aviation. So let's go over a quick outline of what you can expect today. We're going to talk about what a simulator needs. What actual pieces do you need in order to have a simulator or at-home flight simulator? We're going to give a brief coverage of hardware. Today is more about the applicability and what you can do with a simulator rather than how to build one or what hardware pieces are out there. We do have other webinars and YouTube videos that cover hardware deeply in coverage, but today we're going to focus a little bit more on what to do with them. We're going to talk about the two most popular programs out there today, which is Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 and X-Plane 12. We're going to talk about how you can edit weather in both of those programs. When it comes to instrument flying, a lot of the time we are flying via instruments is because of the weather. So I want to talk a bit about how we can critique and mold the weather to what we're trying to practice in the simulator. And then I'm going to get into some introductory scenarios of how we can use a simulator in instrument conditions and start the connection of how that feeds into a real world use. Then we're going to give Josh Harnagel over at Redbird the controls. And Josh is going to cover FAA approved training devices. So we're going to answer that common question of, can I put ink in my logbook when using a simulator? Areas to focus for IFR proficiency training with a CFI, best practices for using a simulator. Make sure that it's not collecting dust and you're actually using it as a tool and not a toy. And then lastly, we'll round it out with some questions and answers. So let's jump into first slide. What do you need to have a at-home flight simulator? The first thing is you're going to need a computer. Think of this as the body of your flight simulator. It'll have the tower, it'll have the screen where you're able to interact and get indications of what your simulator is doing, keys and a mouse to navigate to the correct flights that you want. But really, PC or Macintosh is required in order to have a simulator. The next step is you're going to need some software. You are going to need either Microsoft's program that came out in 2020 or X-Plane 12, which is a little bit more recent, to create a digital aircraft and run on your computer and create those scenarios that we're going to talk about today. And then lastly, you're going to need flight sim hardware. Now, technically, you can use a simulator with the default keyboard and mouse, as you see on the left image, but at that point, you are not using it as a simulator, in my mind. To have a physical yoke that you can pull back on, push forward on, roll left and right, or a stick, that brings us a lot closer to real life applicability. And I think that's the end goal of using a simulator is I want this to get as close to flying an actual aircraft as possible. And the hardware that's out in the market today is really going to give you that option. But once you've got those three things, you now have yourself an at-home flight simulator, and you're going to be able to use or fly a lot of the scenarios we talk about today. So let's jump into hardware. Again, this isn't going to be a coverage of all the hardware pieces we have here at Sporty's. I think we're right around 100 different hardware units, but we're just going to cover the mains, and I'm going to give you maybe 2 items per category. First category is going to be yokes, and our most popular yoke here is the Honeycomb Alpha yoke. It is a crowd favorite because of its price point. It's also a very realistic feel. So as you can see, there is a metal shaft that connects the yoke to the base. It rides on ball bearings, so it's very smooth. And then the tension is quite interesting because they use bungee cords internally rather than the more common metal springs that you find in a lot of other yokes. So it feels very smooth. There's no dead zones like some other products out in the flight sim community, and is the most popular yoke we sell here at Sporty's. If you're looking for something that's version 2.0 or 3.0 in the flight training world, the Redbird alloy yoke is one to consider. This yoke feels like you're actually sitting in a Cessna. As you are pulling back, pushing forward, rolling left and right, the feeling is very, very similar. You can also see that the top of each yoke handle is close to, if not on par with what you'd get in an actual aircraft. And as you can see, the base or the box of the alloy yoke is very long, and that is because they want to make sure you have plenty of give on pull and push, but it's also a very robust piece. It's great if you are really wanting to use a simulator to get you as close to your actual aircraft or what you're going to be training in, and is one worth considering if you're very serious about using a simulator. Next, we have throttles. We need to be able to send some engine management controls. And the way we do that is with these 2 options here. We'll start with the Logitech throttle. This is a great beginner throttle. It will hang on the side of your desk, and it gives you the 3 levers, throttle, prop, and mixture, and then 3 two-way switches at the base of the throttle. I like to highlight that you could take 2 of these and put them next to each other, and then you have 6 levers. So if you want to get into the multi-engine area, you have the ability to do that frugally with the Logitech throttles. The Honeycomb Bravo throttle quadrant is not as popular as the yoke, but a close second, I'd say, here at Sporty's. And it's because of the feature set that comes with the Honeycomb Bravo throttle. And we'll work our way counterclockwise here to cover everything it does. I'm going to start on the left side, which is a 2-position gear lever with accurate 3 light indicators. So if you are flying a digital aircraft that has retractable gear, we can help you out there. Moving along, there's the color-coded trim wheel. So if you need to trim your aircraft out to make sure you're getting VY on your climb out from an airport, it's much better to do it with a trim wheel you can slowly make those changes with on your throttle. A big one, not to be glazed over as we continue on, is the 6 levers, allowing multiple aircraft configurations. So in this image, you can see there's 2 throttles, 2 props, and 2 mixture handles. So it's simulating a general aviation aircraft in multi-engine configuration. But each one of these levers can come off and be set somewhere else. So we could take one of those throttles off, one of those props off, one of those mixtures off, and then we're flying a single engine complex aircraft. We could even take both prop levers off and 1 throttle, 1 mixture stay on, and now we've got a starter 172. So there's really a lot of ways we can configure this. It also comes with commercial levers in the box. It's not an add-on, so you could fly a Cessna Citation, an Airbus, Boeing, Any of those aircraft can be managed with these throttles, and I think that is why it's so popular, is it covers a very, very wide range of aircraft. As we move along, you'll see there's a tension knob, so we can increase how difficult it is to move said levers. There's a flap lever on the right side, and then on the top of the Honeycomb Bravo, there's autopilot controls. And I really like to highlight those, especially for this presentation, because autopilot is something we're going to use a lot when flying in instrument conditions. So to better understand the autopilot, to take those introductory understanding of the autopilot, it's very valuable. And the way the Bravo works is on the left side, you'll see a switch where you can choose your altitude, vertical speed, heading, course, or indicated airspeed. You choose which one of those you want to edit. For instance, if I choose altitude and then I turn the knob on the right side, it's going to increase or decrease my altitude bug or setting. And then when I want to activate it, you can see the soft key right in the center. So this is a really great way to learn what's going to happen if I haven't intercepted my course, but yet I hit the approach button. Or how do I set vertical speed to intercept my altitude I have set into my autopilot. You can do that with the Honeycomb Bravo and these programs we're going to cover today. Moving on, we have some pedals. You want to make sure you can stay on the center line and also brake as you're getting ready to do your run up digitally if it is. Starter is the Thrustmaster rudder pedals. These are counter swings, so if you push on the right one will move forward, the left will come back. They also have individual toe brakes. It checks a box, if you will. But if you want something that is more close to what you get in a trainer, where there's a change in tension as you push further on one of those brakes, the RD1 rudder pedals from Redbird are the leader right there. You can see these are completely metal. They are very heavy, which is actually a good thing. A lot of the flight sim community constantly mentions how when you have cheap rudder pedals and you push hard on the right side, maybe you've got a crosswind you're coming in with, they'll start to slide on the floor. That's not the case with the Redbird rudder pedals. They will stay where you put them. They're nice and robust. They have individual toe brakes, counter sway, and as you see, are very similar to what you'd find in the bottom of a Cessna 172. Flight sticks. Let's say you're flying a Piper Cub or maybe something more military focused. We've got some flight sticks for you too. I like flight sticks because they cover everything that a yoke, a throttle body, and rudder pedals would do in a much smaller profile. So the Logitech flight stick yoke on the left, push forward, that's pitch, push left, that's roll. You can actually twist the stick clockwise and counterclockwise, and there's your yaw. And then at the base, there's a little throttle lever, so you can control your throttle with that. So really, this is great if you have a flight sim on a laptop and you're traveling. This would be an option right there because it takes up almost no space and is our, I think, best option for someone getting started. Looking at the next option, the Logitech X56, this one is for a little bit more the advanced simmer. It has two separate bases, so you can move the stick to the right side or the left side. We then have a throttle with metal switches, resetting switches. In the current configuration, it's one throttle, but there is a lever you can pull and you'll see that brake down the center of the throttle. There's now two pieces. So you can have two different engines in control with that one device. I think we counted one time and there's roughly about 170 different commands from this device you can send to a simulator with all the buttons, levers, sliders, axes controls. So really it is it's a great piece for someone who is maybe next level, but worth considering if a flight stick is right for you. Instrument accessories, wanted to cover a few products that don't fall into the previous ones, but are great for instrument training. The EFB mount, this is something we sell if you wanna put it in your aircraft and fly around holding your EFB, but it also works really great for a desk because of the C-clamp we have right here in the kit. So when the C-clamp is connected to the arm and the arm is connected to this iPad holder or mount holder we have, you are then able to apply this to your desk and use that in tandem with a flight simulator. So if you're running ForeFlight or Garmin Pilot, you can connect that to a simulator and easily use your EFB as you would in a real life aircraft. Another thing I like to highlight in simulation flight is the ProFlight radio panel. If you are working on communication, This is a great option to make sure you can quickly change your comms. It also works with nav1, nav2, ADF, DME, or ident and transponder codes. So it's a quick, easy way to make those changes to your radio panel. When if you don't have something like this, you're moving your mouse on the screen to change comms, and sometimes that can get a little challenging. Rounding out instrument accessories, we have a flight simulator headset. Again, that feeds into the realistic feel, but also allows you to communicate. And then we have the real sim gear avionics. If you want to get better understanding of how avionics work, what happens when I'm on this page and I turn the dial 2 times, what's the screen going to look like? Today's simulators offer accurate logic of what those pages will look like. And again, if you don't want to use your mouse to hit those digital soft keys, the real sim gear pieces allow you to bring something onto your desk, onto your flight sim build, and you can turn those dials, you can push those soft keys, and it will react just as like if you're in a real aircraft with the GNS 430 or the Garmin 530 on the bottom. There's also G1000s, additional options from real sim gear, but I think that's a great piece if you're using it for instrument training. So let's talk about the programs that are out there. First off, we have navigating Microsoft Flight Simulator. Here we have the home page. As you can see, it's very friendly to the user. We can start with some activities if you want to do the bullseye landing on the top left. I believe that's flying a Piper Cub onto a helicopter stand. We also have flight training on the bottom left. We have additional activities. We have a marketplace. So if you want to add or shop for aircraft that will plug into Microsoft Flight Sim, it's all included in the program itself. And then we have the world map, which is what we're going to focus on for the next minute or two. But this is very similar to what you would see on maybe Google Maps. You can drag and drop moving planet Earth, and you can zoom in on any airport in the world is populated in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So if I zoomed in to our neck of the woods and I wanted to do a flight, say from India 69er, Claremont County, Batavia Airport, and I'm going to go up to Chicago Midway International Chicago, it will populate that route. And right now it's defaulted to a direct GPS route. It gives me current winds at both locations and gives me about how long and how far that route's going to be. As you see where the VFR direct GPS drop-down arrow is underneath the aircraft on the left side, we can select that and change it to, say, VORs. And it will quickly default to what are the closest VORs for our route and defer us to that. Another thing we can do is, what if I don't want to fly that TBM 930 that's in the top left image? I can go ahead and click on that and look at my roster of aircraft. I currently have about 66 different types of aircraft in Microsoft Flight Sim, which is dependent on which version of the program you buy. And then also there's add-on aircraft you can get, sometimes free, sometimes you got to pay for them. But I've got about 66 right now. For yesterday's lesson or the screen grabs I was taking, I wanted to fly the Bonanza G36. So we select that piece, go back to our map, and now you'll see that's populated in the top left. And it gives us our time based off the Bonanza's cruise speed to Chicago and the routes we're going to fly. All that's left is to go ahead and fly at this point. Let's take the other side and start talking about X-Plane 12. This program is a little bit newer. There have been, as you can guess, 12 iterations of X-Plane. X-Plane 11 was very, very popular, and then when 12 came out, they really focused on what it looks like a lot more outside of the aircraft. And I think it's a great program for anyone who is using a simulator to go along with flight training, or is absolutely in the instrument realm, which again is meat and potatoes of today's conversation. Here's our main page. We can resume the last flight, get into a new flight, load a previously saved flight. They also have a flight school, and then if we want to change some settings, we have that ability too. As we go into a new flight, we are met with our airplane index of what we can choose from for the day's flight. I'm going to choose that Cessna Skyhawk. And then the top right, you're going to see location. That's where we can choose where we want to take off. Beneath that, we have weather settings, which we'll get to in a little bit. And then time of day. We can choose whether it's daytime, nighttime, what time of the year, all those abilities. So let's jump into where we're taking off from. So I'm going to choose location portion. And here we have airports. So I can search Claremont County Airport. Beneath that, I can start on the ramp or on the runway. I can start on runway 4 or runway 22. It also gives me distances, widths, and it'll give me some details about Claremont County Airport. Now, one thing I like to highlight is you see the little drop down that says on runway. If I click that drop down arrow, it will then give me the option of I can start on a 3 nautical mile approach or a 10 nautical mile approach. So if there's a day where you want to practice approaches, you want to work on hitting that ILS or the RNAV approach, this is a nice quick way, instead of taking off, flying out, getting to your location, and then intercepting and starting the approach, you can quickly start 10 nautical miles out, load it into your system or your aircraft, and go. So I think that's a nice way to quickly practice some of these things. Let's talk about weather. As mentioned, weather is going to be a big portion of instrument flying. So to be able to move it around, it's helpful to however we want to use the said simulator. Here on Microsoft's weather page, we're able to choose a couple things on the left side, which is, I like to call it pulling from the web or pulling from the internet. We can do live players, so it will populate anyone else who is flying Microsoft Flight Sim in your world. We can do live traffic. So if there's an airliner flying over your house, it's going to populate into this program with that option. And then we can do live weather, self-explanatory there. On the right side, you can see we're going to talk, we have the abilities to change time of day, what day of the year it is, a little switch for turning on live weather right here, a drop-down menu for preset configurations. We can affect cloud settings, we can affect the wind settings, and then where those clouds start, where they end, and even precipitation, snow, temperature, pressure, altitude, all those things we can configure in this program. If I turn on that live weather setting, I lose all those abilities because it's going to populate what's happening in my location or what airport I'm taking off from. We turn that back off and we get into some of these pre-configured. We have the basics. We also have some challenging. We want to go fly in a storm or snow or rain. We have the ability there. So a lot of things we can critique in Microsoft Flight Simulator to make sure what scenario or what challenging area we want to fly in. We can do that. Another thing I like is you can, on the whim, change these weather settings while flying the aircraft. There's a drop-down menu while you're flying, and right now I'm in the outside view, so you'll see I'm in that Bonanza, cruising along on our flight up to Chicago, and I can bring up weather, and I can change where the cloud bottoms and tops are within a second or two. There's no exiting out of the program. It's all on the fly, and I think that's very helpful to challenge ourselves and to make sure that we're flying in those challenging scenarios. So that's one thing I really like about Microsoft's program. Jumping into X-Plane 12, that weather option we saw back when we were looking at aircraft. We choose the weather settings page. This is where we will show up. You can see towards the top, we have some pre-configured settings that we are able to choose. We also have the ability to manually enter weather, or we can also choose the clouds. We can choose what type of clouds, coverage, and again, there are those tops and those bottoms, as mentioned before, to where, let's say we want to practice coming into an airport and we want those cloud bases maybe 200 to 300 feet above our minimums and really, test ourselves. We have the ability to get that specific with cloud layers. As mentioned, we currently are inputting those settings ourselves, but we can download real weather. And on the day I ran this test, you can see all the different wind headings and knot variations were pre-populated. A little bit of clouds up in the 31,000 MSL range, but I don't think we need to worry about that in our Cessna 172 or Bonanza for that sake. But it will populate the current settings at Claremont County, temperature, baro setting, visibility. They're all in there. Okay, so now what are some scenarios we can practice in a simulator now that we've talked about a bunch? First one is straight and level flying in instrument conditions. I think this is a great way just to start with the basics, get used to flying that aircraft when you can't see the ground. That is a skill that will degrade with time, so I like recommending that one. Now, if you're doing that, of course, you're going to be working on your instrument scan, making sure none of those dials get away from you. It's also a way of, if you're moving from steam gauges to glass, it's a great way to make that transition, make that move. I mentioned it earlier with the real sim gear pieces, but you can get a better understanding of your avionics in a simulator. Avionics is a computer. There's logic to it. There's what happens at these pages, exit, scroll next. It's enough to learn how to fly an aircraft and then learn a computer logic while flying an aircraft. I know for me it was quite challenging. So I like the idea that you can get better acquainted with avionics in the comfort of your home. Another one is autopilot understanding. As I mentioned with the Honeycomb Bravo and its settings, we can go ahead and get a better idea of when flying an approach, what's going to happen with the aircraft in our current settings. How do I get it so that the vertical speed will intercept that altitude I have set? What's going to happen if I hit that level button? We can test all that out in a flight simulator and be better prepared for when we jump in an actual aircraft. Approach briefings. I know for me, that was quite a big challenge of making sure I had everything spot on of what I wanted before I started the approach. And just like, repetition, muscle memory, we can do that in a flight simulator and work out those little bugs we've got so that it's a lot more fluid when we're in an actual aircraft. You might look a little crazy talking to yourself at home, running an approach brief, but it is a good practice. Holds. If you are ever lucky enough to be given a hold, maybe flying into a very busy airport and you've got a slow Cessna 172, it's good to know the correct way to enter holds, to know how that right turning hold should feel, timing hold, maybe it's a left turning hold, maybe it's a right. Those are things we can easily practice in a simulator and get better at. And then the flight patterns, the entry practice of instrument flying. This was helpful for me because it gives you those building blocks that really feed into flying any approach or missed approach or things of that sort. Flying the flight patterns and timing your turns, things of that sort, that's easy to do in a simulator also. Last but certainly not least is approach to minimums. In a simulator, if I know the approach plate for an airport close to me and I'm practicing that day, I know that the missed approach point is 570 feet MSL. I can go into the simulator and make those cloud bottoms at 600 feet AGL, MSL, so 25-foot difference. So I'm really testing myself by bringing down that threshold of when I come out of the clouds to when is my missed approach point, and practice those scenarios that we may find ourselves in of, I can't see the airport, even though I really want to land, let's do a go around. You're allowed to create those in a simulator and test out those things that you'll be better acquainted at if you ever have to experience them in real life. And with that, that concludes my portion of the presentation. I am now going to give controls over to Josh, and he is going to take it from here.
Thanks, Chris. That was great. I really appreciate all the information, and I'm sure the attendees do as well. All right, so hopefully y'all can see my screen. My name is Josh Harnagel. I'm the VP of Marketing for Redbird, but I'm also a CFI, II, and an MEI. Redbird had a flight school that we ran for a little while, and I was part of the management team of that, and I own a Bonanza. So I appreciate, Chris, the call out to the Bonanza in your screenshots. That made it fun for me. So today, like Chris said, I'm going to talk more on the approved side. I'm going to try to keep it kind of a higher level conversation. We will go into some detail, but the idea here is that I want to talk about what you can do to supplement your home sim practice and to really stay proficient, current, legal, and really on top of your game. And one of the bigger differences, the home sim, I have one. I'm a big believer in it. I think it's It's a super useful tool. And honestly, you can customize them a lot more towards your specific aircraft, but it's good to get in an environment with an instructor and use an approved simulator. There can be some advantages to that on a sort of scheduled or an occasional basis at least. So just real quick, there are essentially 3 different types of FAA approval levels. And there's a bunch of other stuff if you're in Europe or whatever, but we'll focus on the US. There are full flight simulators, which are the full motion ones that you probably have a picture in your head that the airlines use. Those are super expensive, and we're not going to talk about them. There are flight training devices, FTDs, level 4 through 6, and those are aircraft specific. Generally, you'll find them in larger flight schools that have fleets that are all the same airplanes, or in training centers, like if you go to SimCom or something like that, there's probably they're using FTDs. I'm also not really going to focus a lot on that. Those tend to not take the sort of walk-in training, and if you're going to a place like SimCom, it's probably an insurance mandate or something like that, and not really part of a single pilot IFR proficiency program that you're putting together at home. So I'll be focusing on the aviation training device, and there are 2 levels of that. There is an AATD and a BATD, and I will say I'm referencing my products because I'm in marketing, but there are other companies out there that do this. They make some of them make really good products, and there's certainly no intended slight on those. So from my perspective, the biggest thing is getting in them, working with an instructor, and becoming more proficient. At the end of the day, I'm a pilot, and I want to make sure we all stay safe out there. So we have a basic aviation training device and an advanced aviation training device, and these are 2 different levels that give you the main legal difference is what you can log in them. There is typically the AATDs have a lot more feature sets. They have robust instructor stations. They have more wraparound visuals. There's just a lot of additional sort of realism that can be added in an AATD, but the BATDs are an approved device as well. On the BATD side, we can do 10 hours towards an instrument rating under Part 61, and we can maintain our instrument currency. The FAA recently, well, not super recently, but relatively recently updated the regs. So you can check out FAR 6157C2, and it'll specifically call out ATDs as useful for currency. You can do any combination of airplane, full flight simulator, FTD, or ATD to get your 6 approaches in 6 months and a hold. That's all legal. And when they say ATD, that means both a BATD and an AATD. I think there can be some confusion about that, but ATD encompasses both. Excuse me. On the ATD side, it's 20 hours towards an instrument. You can do your instrument currency, and you can do the majority of an instrument proficiency check. We'll talk a little bit about that later on. So if you go into a flight school and you want to fly their sim and log it, there are a few things that might be helpful for you to get a little background information on. The first one is an advisory circular from the FAA 61136B, which is the document that outlines how a device gets approved as an ATD and all the rules around it. And then the most important piece of paper is the manufacturer will submit an application and get a letter of authorization that is specific for the device in question. And it will list in detail, in bullet pointed detail, everything that can be done in that device. The flight school is required to have that on the wall or available to you. So a good thing to check when you go in there is ask for the letter of authorization and just take a look through it, because while the AC specifies this is the sort of standard things that AATDs can be approved for, or standard things that BATD can be approved for, there is discretion where the FAA can approve things for more than that list or less than that list. So I would double check it, the actual letter of authorization, LOA, for the device in question. Now that it applies to model number, not serial number. So in this case, the LOI or the LOA on the right-hand side of the screen is for all Redbird LD, SD, FM, FMX, and MCX, not specific installs, which is one of the main differences from a legal perspective from an ATD versus an FTD. And then the manufacturer will get this letter by submitting a qualification and approval guide, which the AC talks about in great detail. The operator of the sim should have a copy of that if you wanted more information about the device. And if not, you should be able to get it from the manufacturer. Like Redbird will send you our QAG if you're interested in it. Okay, so when we talk about sims, and this is kind of applies to all sims, but specifically talking about, I'm going to kind of focus a little bit on the ATD and really the advanced aviation training device for the rest of this, because those tend to be what you see in a lot of flight schools now. The sim is an excellent procedures trainer, maneuvers, checklists, all the kinds of rote skill sets that you need to do, you need to learn. And as Chris was talking about, approach briefings, setting up the cockpit, I adjust my power at this point, I put my flaps down at that point, all that kind of stuff the sim is great for. I think if you're a current instrument pilot and you're moving into and you're trying to stay current, and you're trying to sharpen your skills, honestly, some of the better things that you can use the sim for are lower on this list. Things like situational awareness and decision making and emergency training. You don't want to be lost in the real airplane. You don't want to be in a situation where you're having failures in the real airplane. The sim is the place to do that and to learn from that. The truth is, it takes a really good instructor to do those last three things really well. And excuse me, we'll talk. Excuse me. We'll talk a little bit about what you can do to help your instructor provide the training that you need in that situation. I just throw this in there because I have seen a lot of this is more for private pilots, but I have seen people try to do some stuff in the sim that the sim isn't very good at, and then they go, oh, this is pointless. I would never, it's a waste of time. The sim's not going to land right. It just won't. Even the big level Ds that I've flown tend to land a little weird. The feeling is just not right. The stall is going to be a little bit wrong, and then on the ground it's going to taxi like a Zamboni. So it is just sort of the nature of the physics models we use to drive these simulators and the limitations of the fact that it is a sim and not a real airplane. So just kind of keep that in mind. But if you're doing instrument stuff, it's just such a good platform to practice and learn and kind of push your envelope. When you go and sit down with an instructor or you book an instructor to do a instrument, either proficiency check or just I have a policy. I fly with an instructor once a quarter in the sim or in the airplane, just to check on what I'm doing and keep myself sharp. And so when I sit down with an instructor, the main issue, the main thing that needs to be overcome and understood is what is the instructor's attitude towards A, the simulator, and B, this kind of practice. If the instructor is primarily focused on initial instrument training, a lot of times the training you get as a rated instrument pilot is probably not what you need. The truth is you're not really focused on kind of how do I fly the needles exactly right all the time. That's honestly what your home sim is for. Like use the time that you have on your home sim to do your basic instrument flying. What you want in this sim with an instructor is somebody who can add in that situational things. They can add in the decision making, and they can watch what you do, and then outside of that, after the flight, provide some feedback on you saying, hey, I saw you loaded the approach at this point. You should be aware if you do that, X could happen, Y could happen, or maybe consider putting your flaps down here, or that kind of stuff. And so making sure you're real clear with your instructor on what you are looking for in that training session, and that the sim is a really good place to do that. They really do need to understand that the sim is really just an awesome platform for instrument proficiency training. And they may want to go out and fly in the airplane, and they're upset that you just booked the sim, but at the end of the day, you own your training and you have to take ownership of it and ask them to provide the services that you're looking for. And I would say go in with a plan. I would not, especially if you only fly once a year or occasionally with an instructor, I would not rely on them to provide the plan for you. Go in with a plan of what you would like to accomplish, what you'd like to see, and leave some space in there for them to be creative about emergencies or situational decision making. But you say, I'm based on the type of flying I do, these are the kinds of things I want to practice. And the truth is, and I noted this at the bottom, John Zimmerman from Sporty's had a great blog post last month or earlier this month on airfacts about what matters for IFR proficiency, and he makes a really strong case that at the end of the day, people get in situations because of lack of procedural knowledge or bad judgment, but what kills them in those situations is their inability to fly the airplane by reference to instruments and focus on that. And so if you can kind of build in the idea that what I would like to get to in a sim session with an instructor is where I feel that pressure, where I feel the pressure of, I got to load this approach, I got to brief this, oh, what is that warning light? And I have to force myself to focus on flying the airplane. Like, that is such a good instrument skill. And again, you don't want to do that in the real thing. Sim's great for it. And then just to sort of reiterate, it is not initial instrument training, and you should be clear with that and with your instructor and with yourself. And so, one of the things that kind of bugs me a lot of times is you go up with a CFI and you start doing full procedures. Nobody does full procedures in real instrument flying. It's super rare to get an initial approach fix, do a procedure turn, fly the whole thing down. You get vectors. You almost always get vectors. And while vectors seem like they're the easier way to do it, there's actually some real gotchas in there around sequencing autopilots, making sure you have the airplane slowed from the transition from cruise to approach. And it's a little that kind of stuff is honestly clear cut when you're doing a full procedure. So I would recommend, have your instructor give you vectors, because that's what you're going to be actually doing in the airplane. Shoot GPS approaches and ILSs, because that's what you're actually going to be doing in the airplane. You do need to keep, you should have all your skills sharp, but when you're paying for an instructor's time, I think the most valuable thing you can do is practice like you play. Okay, real quick, the IPC. So this, there's some rumors that this may change. I don't know if it's true or not, but as of this moment, there's a table in the back of the instrument ACS that defines what is required for an instrument proficiency check. And there's some notes down there about what can be done. So in an AATD, what it all sort of boils down to is you can do everything in an IPC except for a circling approach and a landing from an approach in an AATD. Both of those things have to be done inside of a real airplane or a level B, C, or D full flight simulator. So what that means practically is that you could do the full IPC in the sim and then go out, join an approach, on final, execute a circle from that approach, and then land, and you would meet the requirements of an IPC. Personally, I think an IPC in the sim is probably way more valuable than an IPC in the airplane, especially if you're having to deal with a busy area and you don't, you're getting jumped from one approach to the next, which tends to be what happens. Because again, practice like you play. It's pretty rare that I will go shoot 3 approaches in 45 minutes if it's a real flight somewhere, right? The way I actually fly is I fly for 2 hours, almost fall asleep, get distracted, and then boom, all of a sudden I'm in an approach and having to make critical decisions. Like that is a much more valuable sort of practice than I think. And again, so I think that the IPC is doable in the sim, and I would recommend trying to get an instructor on board with that plan, because there's so much more you can do in the sim than in the airplane, and then go out, put 2 or 3 tenths on the airplane and meet the letter of the law. So that's but this again only applies for AATDs, Advanced Aviation Training Devices. A BATD, you cannot do any of the IPC, but you can use the BATD to maintain instrument currency, 6 approaches in 6 months. So this slide actually comes from another presentation I give that's for instructors. And these are kind of the main things that I tell instructors are super important for sim sessions, and it's also important for the students, especially in the environment that we're in, where it's kind of hard to get really qualified, you know, lots of experienced instructors are hard to find. So again, we gotta that instructor's got to value the simulator. We don't get in the sim if we don't have a goal. You know, it's very easy, and this I would say applies to home sims as well. If you're using it for your instrument proficiency or your proficiency as a pilot in general, when you run into when you start flying the sim and you don't really have a goal, it's really easy for it to become a video game, and then you find yourself, you know, doing loops down the strip in Vegas or something, and all the training value is sort of gone out. Now that's a fine thing if you want to do that, but make sure if this is a session that you're going to work on your instrument proficiency, that you really don't fall into that trap. And then, you know, keeping things as realistic as possible. And one of the other things that I think is abused in most simulators is failures, creating failures that are over the top. You know, an alternator failure is depending on the airplane, verging on an emergency, depending on the time of day and where you are, and that's enough to handle in one flight. But if you decide you were going to do an alternator failure, and we're flying through thunderstorms, and then when we land, we're going to fail the brakes, so you run off the runway, there's not a whole lot that you're going to learn there, right? Other than how to crash the sim. So I'd like to reinforce with instructors, at least, to not really create those inescapable situations. The learning really shuts down in that environment. So deal with things on a realistic way. I mean, I think a great way, if you're like me and you read accident reports, recreate those situations. I mean, that might be a good plan to go in with an instructor. Say, I want to do an IPC and I have these 2 accident reports. I want to fly these approaches. I want to be in this situation, and I want failures like that to happen. So you can see what they saw and see where the breakdown was. And then knowing when to pause. In general, people pause too much. You want to keep, if you're still processing, if you're still able to control the airplane and do the next right thing, even if you're way behind, keep the session running at live speed. It's when you get so far behind that your brain sort of shuts down, pause, get a grip, and then come back into it. I did throw in a little bit here on a personal proficiency plan. This has become a big point for me, and I think if we look at the airlines specifically, every airline pilot has a mandated proficiency plan. They go in and they get sim training every 6 months. They're doing FOQA and active day-by-day tracking of performance of pilots in the fleet in the real world, and we don't really have a great model of that in GA, and it's part of the reason our accident record is so much worse. And so just a couple of ideas. I think if you are an instrument pilot that flies regularly or wants to fly regularly inside of the system, you really need to come up with a plan. Even, you know, I fly somewhere between 100 and 200 hours a year, and it is barely enough to stay on top of it. So if you're, and I do a bunch of training. So if you're more like the average pilot doing 50 hours a year, I really support the idea of coming up with a plan. And then I do have a pitch. We have an app to help you build a plan for your proficiency. It's called Redbird Pro. It's in the App Store. It's got content and simulator tasks that will help. But that is that's the official end of my my presentation, Chris. So if there's any questions, we can cover them.
That was great. That was really, really good, Josh. We have had a couple questions come through earlier. Specifically, one that keeps populating is using a VR headset with simulators, and wanted to see what your take is on that.
Yeah, so I've done a lot with VR and mixed reality. I will say VR is very cool at first, and I think for familiarizing yourself with airport and that kind of thing, there may be a really good use case. I don't particularly like VR for real training because in VR, the whole scene is virtually generated, right? And so you can't see your hands. They have some sort of goofy glove things and try to recognize your hands, but you can't see your hands moving the controls. I'm much more of a proponent of mixed reality, where the outside world is virtually generated, but then you mask off a specific area and you say, and they have cameras on the front of the headset that pass through video of that area, so you can actually see your hands moving controls and knobs. And we have a beta prototype of a product like that using an MR headset. The difficulty with MR is that it's very expensive right now. Hopefully that cost will come down a little bit. So it's truth be told, probably out of the price range of most home users. I think, the kind of industry standard MR headset, the one we're using right now, is like $8,000 with a $3,000 a year annual subscription to the development software. So that's pretty pricey. But there may be some new things coming that will lower that cost. But I think if you're going to use it for training, MR is very much the way to go. And I do think it definitely adds to the realism and the immersion of it. Being able to look out your wing is actually really helps put you in the context or inside of the scenario, which makes the training more valuable.
I agree. We actually had a question that just popped up. What was the name of those things that you clip onto a hat, and that would allow you to turn your head and the monitor would pick it up? And I'm pretty sure those are called tracker IR. So
Yep.
I can feel that one. But I personally, I've flown with that too, and I agree with Josh. It's very, very helpful to be able to turn your head and have your point of view change in the aircraft. Looking over your shoulder to see if you're at the 45 to turn base on a downwind leg. It's very helpful to do that. So I can reiterate what you're saying. A couple that I can go ahead and quickly field. Question is difference between X-Plane and Microsoft Flight Simulator. Which is more configurable with mapping hardware inputs? And the answer I have there is they both have their strengths. The strength of Microsoft is you can have two inputs lead to one setting in the program. And why that is unique is I can hold shift on my keyboard and hit a button and it will do one thing, or I can let go of shift and hit that button and it will do something different. So it really, by a rule of two, if you will, or squares the amount of inputs that a hardware piece can give. So I like that with Microsoft. With X-Plane, they are extremely detailed at what will be changed in the digital aircraft from an input. For instance, they give you an option of increase frequency by 0.005 by hitting this button. You don't have that option in Microsoft Flight Simulator. They may have something of increase pitch trim by 1% every time you hit a button. You don't have that granularity in Microsoft Flight Sim. So X-Plane has more settings or more things it can receive as a command, whereas Microsoft gives you a little bit more flexibility in the two inputs to one programming, and that's what I kind of like about either or. Next question, what is the main difference between X-Plane and Microsoft Flight Sim for IFR training? And I'll answer this one, and Josh, if you've got another approach, feel free to input. I kind of like Microsoft Flight Simulator for more of outside the aircraft training. They put a lot of effort into how things look outside of the digital aircraft, the lakes, the trees, the cities, the houses, they're all accurate as to what's out in the actual world. Whereas X-Plane, I feel, focuses a little bit more on the inside of the aircraft. If you've got an aircraft set at this weight and balance, it's in this flight conditions, this humidity, temperature, runway length, altitude, and you go full throttle, the numbers you get on your vertical speed indicator, your airspeed, when you lift off, those are going to be a little bit more accurate to what you get in real life. So again, each one has their strengths, but for instrument training, I got to give a little bit of a lead to X-Plane's program. This is a good one, I think, for you, Josh. What prevents Microsoft Flight Sim 2020 from becoming an approved simulator?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So there's two things. One, and then sort of the main one is that it is not part of their licensing agreement. The licensing agreement from Microsoft for that product is for home use, personal use only. Microsoft, when they shut down Flight Sim X, Flight Sim 10, they sold the commercial rights to the Flight Sim franchise to Lockheed Martin, who now makes a product called Lockheed Martin Prepared, which is what we use on Redbirds. And so Microsoft does not have the right to sell commercial use privileges to the Flight Sim software. So, I mean, that's the number one no-go, right? If we did that, we'd be opening up ourselves to being sued. So for a manufacturer, that's the limiting factor. The other issues is Microsoft tends to be, well, it is extremely reliant on a network connection and kind of has a heavy lift as far as storage, available storage on the units. And in practical terms, our simulators get installed all over the world in everywhere from hangars to classrooms with really hard firewalls to get through. And so internet connectivity is kind of a non-starter for most commercial sims that are going out there, unless they're the really high-end stuff where you kind of build a building to put it in. So that's the main reason. I would be curious to see, you can also look at that AC from the FAA 61136. I'll just say this, basically anybody can submit a QAG if you're willing to. And so if it's not for sale, you might be able to use Microsoft Flight Sim as your software. But if you try to sell it, you're gonna get sued.
All right. Another one that you can take care of. Someone asked, what are typically the cost of basic aviation train devices?
Sure. So a BATD, I'll tell you, ours run from probably I will say installed all in, with a couple options, probably $75,000 to $8,000, all the way up to maybe 12 or 15. There may be others that are cheaper than that, though. I mean, there may be some in the 3, 4, 5 range.
Very well. And then we are running low on time, and I'm going to try and respond to any questions that we haven't gotten to. But the final one I think we can field is, what is the difference between Redbird Pro and Cloud Ahoy?
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. So Redbird Pro is primarily content. It's articles and quizzes and then scenarios that run on the simulator, and it tracks how you perform in that and gives you a score, and then uses that score to recommend more content for you to do and build a training plan. Cloud Ahoy tracks your flight information both inside the sim. If you're in a Redbird, we have a connection with them, and then in the real airplane as well. And they do provide feedback on maneuvers and that kind of thing, but there's no content associated with Cloud Ahoy.
Perfect. All right, well, I think we are right on time. Josh, I want to say thanks a lot for presenting on everything that's kind of in your bailiwick and what you cover with the Redbird team. I know I learned quite a bit, and I'd like to let everyone know that today's presentation has been recorded. You can expect it on our YouTube page, and we're going to share it with Redbird also. You can expect it on our page probably within the next 24 hours. If you have additional questions that may not have been answered, please send them to flightsim@sportys.com, and either myself or the ones that are above my pay grade, I'll send on over to Josh, and we'll get you those answers. But again, I want to say thank you to Josh and Redbird, and thank you to everyone else who attended today's webinar.